Huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and people folk. It's time for another episode of Cryptid Clues. I'm one of your hosts, Reuben Olson.
I am one of the other hosts, Taylor Field.
One of the other hosts.
One of the others.
Yes, we have a very wonderful episode for you today. Today we're going to be covering a very peculiar aspect to one of the more common cryptids. So it's about time we start talking about Bigfoot. And I know there's a lot of Bigfoot podcasts. So today we're going to do something different, and we're going to look at how far back does creatures, cryptids, etc. like Bigfoot go. So we're going to be covering the Wildman.
Oh yeah. Before we get to that, we got a couple plugs that we're just going to shout your way. Be sure to check us out at CryptidClues.ca. That is our home base. CryptidClues@gmail.com. If you want to reach out, you have any cool stories or encounters you just want to share with us, we'd be happy to look into it and hear from you. And then we're also on social media. You can tune into our Facebook and our Twitter. And then you can also find us on Patreon, where we do drop our episodes usually in advance, and they are ad-free as well. We are in the process of kind of like retweaking our tiers a little bit, just to kind of make them a little bit more beneficial, spicy.
Shout out to our one Patreon.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Kapruka.
Maybe all of our listeners should join him. You know, he might be dropping some special Patreon only episodes soon.
Yes.
And not typical podcast episodes either, might we add. So to start us off with the medieval Wildman. Ooh, there's the era we're talking about. Tales of the Wildman are prevalent throughout history, and you'll be surprised at how far back this actually goes. Like Bigfoot, I thought started with the Patterson-Gimlin footage. There was some historical documents before that, you know, but this goes back way further if you really look at it and go, could there be other creatures that are like Bigfoot-ish, or is this Bigfoot? Well, let's find out. So the Wildman, also referred to in modern times as Woodwose, thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien resurfacing a very ancient term for these guys. The Wildman appears in Celtic, Slavic, Roman, and medieval mythology and history, spanning from Arthurian legend, poetry, fiction, historical accounts, and tales. And holy cow, is there a ton of imagery. At the very end of this episode, we're actually going to be taking a look at all of the different paintings, pictures, torn up, gross looking things and sculptures.
The sculptures.
Everything. Now, of course, you won't be able to see them, but we are going to describe them very, very well for you listeners. So let's dive in and take a look, or, well, a listen for all of our guests, as Taylor and I talk over our notes on the Wildman and study much more.
Well, we're going to do our best to compile this information for you guys, because it's very sporadic. There's so many different things.
Speaking of sporadic,
yeah?
I forgot to even mention, this is our 10th episode.
It is.
It's our 10th episode.
Oh my goodness.
I almost forgot to mention that. I feel really bad.
Episode
hey,
10.
It's a special point.
That's originally why we decided to do this.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I just got too excited about the Wildman.
Yeah.
Anyways, carry on.
Yeah, the medieval Wildman. Now, from my research, you had mentioned the term Woodwose. That is the same term that I had found. So this is basically a mythical figure that appears in the art and literature of medieval Europe. Said to be smaller and more man-like, reportedly around 6 to 7 feet tall, walks on 2 feet, gorilla-like facial features covered in hair all over the entire body. The term Woodwose roughly translates into woodman. Again, it's a straight, I don't want to say carbon copy of a Bigfoot, but it's just, I mean, it's similar. Maybe a foot or two short, but
a foot or two short for Bigfoot.
Yeah. The Woodrose imagery found in England, or is found in England, from 8th century leading all the way up to the 16th century. Depicting these men in the forests It's usually rarely of women, but depicted in a variety of medias. And this is what you had mentioned in all these different forms. So like dramas, manuscripts, paintings, I imagine like tapestries, urns, yeah, everywhere.
Caskets.
Yeah, it's crazy. So without many stories really kind of existing of these creatures, because I imagine many people that encountered these things back in the day didn't catalog it, and the ones that did, well, they're represented in all of these different mediums. But through these medium representations, from what I had found, it definitely seemed like they were implying that these things were more like tricksters. And I do feel like, again, that is sort of I don't want to say mentality, but an attribute to a current day.
It is, really.
Sasquatch.
I mean, current Bigfoot are often viewed as tricksters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You want me to keep running? Or do you have something?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to make like a Loki joke about the whole trickster thing, but I'm not going to do that now that I said I'm going to do it.
So in the 12th century, these creatures, again, began to appear in English churches, as you mentioned, like carved into different sorts of pieces, carved into fonts, spandrels, roof pieces. Many of these depictions show the woodwolves fighting off lions and dragons.
And that's so strange. I mean, you think of Bigfoot, you think of the footage, you think of the meme that Bigfoot has become, but you don't realize that there's carvings of this thing. There's hairy men carved into churches. What? Mm-hmm. I never realized that was a thing. There's hairy men and women painted in ancient paintings. That blew my mind, okay? Yeah. It took me a while to accept that there's UFOs and stuff hidden in older paintings, but there's Bigfoot too? That's insanity.
And they're religious. They're religious pieces of work, which is even weirder. But again, I shouldn't say too weird, because there are many tales in religion that do dive?
Ooh, that's like 12? Sounds like a new Magic the Gathering mechanic.
They dive into monsters and demons and that sort of stuff. So I guess we'll get to that. But
let's delve right into it.
Yeah, well, there you go. It was widely believed that the woodwolves would scare away evil spirits. However, in many other art depictions, the woodwolves as clubs sometimes had children tied to them. And again, I did see imagery with that, which was very... the hairs went up on my neck. It was very alarming. As per legend, they had immense superhuman strength. This I find interesting, and I don't have any way of properly determining where this is originating from, but they were deaf to the word God. But I found that very interesting. They would think nothing of snatching a child and eating them. Mm-hmm. This appetite was carried over onto the adults as well, meaning adult humans. Male woodwoses would abduct females, and vice versa. Female woodwoses would seduce and lure men. And since, again, they've been labeled as cousins of a Sasquatch.
It's interesting that you bring up deaf to the word of God, because I studied medieval European history in college. Now, in medieval times, if you were not intelligent enough to understand the concept of religion, you were not considered intelligent. So even like the special folk in the village, people who had mental disabilities or any kind of handicaps that held them back a little bit in their education, they wouldn't really be considered humans. So it would be the same for wild men. If they don't speak the same language, if you can't make them understand a concept of religion, then they would be viewed either as an animal, or perhaps because of their appearance similar to us, an outcast or an abomination.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it makes total sense. I'm flipping to the next page of my notes. I took a page out of Reuben's book and actually got my notes all very organized and not just on a notepad on my iPhone. And I printed them.
And now my notes are just all one big slab of text for once.
But yeah, I mean, you got multiple pages.
You got lots of pages there.
What do I have here? Part of my notes there was cut off because my printer didn't really deliver there.
Noted.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
You were on such a good roll.
I know. So, I have one image. It didn't pop into my notes, but I did send it to you. We can talk about that later, but it was basically like an ivory coffer, and it showed a woman being saved with a knight from a wild man. And that was 14th century.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like a very cool ivory coffin.
Yeah.
And there's this knight. Is he on a horse? He's on a horse, right?
Yes.
Spear right through the mouth of a wild man or like a Bigfoot-like creature.
Yeah.
Coming out the other side. And then there's some people like cowering behind that. And it's just interesting that that's depicted there.
Yeah, it really, really is. During Romanesque Europe, a wild man is described in the book of Skuggsjø. I'm pronouncing that horribly. I apologize. This was a book written in Norway in 1250 AD. So I found it interesting because this book, when you look at what its contents were, it has information on trade, seafaring, like kingdom management, relations, all that sort of stuff. It was a very interesting book. And several chapters, however, detail encounters of wild men or woodwoses. I thought that was incredibly interesting. And again, it's seen again. A black, hairy, forest-dwelling creature is detailed in the book of Renaud de Montauban. And that was written in the late 12th century. Again, I apologize. I'm not good with these names sometimes. Renaissance engravers in Germany and Italy were actually particularly fond of wild men, the women, the families, and everything. So, you know, that's a cryptid just cruising through the house. He's a giant cat-like thing.
Oh, Kitty wants to play. He's dragged in a toy.
But that's kind of where it caps off for my woodwoses notes. Now, I know you had some more information on that, didn't you?
Well, we're kind of bleeding in from the whole term woodwose and going straight into the more common wildman term. Mm-hmm. And I think wildman's almost a broader category because you have these human-sized Bigfoots that are really close to the edge of civilization. And as you go out from there, it just seems like they get depicted as being bigger and bigger. Now, a lot of what I'm going to read is going off the assumption that some of these are historical accounts. But towards the end, I am going to look at a rebuttal by a Reddit user who offers a very good explanation for the concept of the wild man, and perhaps completely eliminating my argument that Bigfoot exists before the dawn of the Patterson-Gimlin film. But we'll get to that later. So, as we now know, the wild man was a common image and belief in Europe during the Middle Ages, and before that too. They were feared, and supposedly, even a few were tamed. And we'll see that later when we take a look at the images and stuff. They're depicted in art out of the wazoo. Anyways, I honestly had no idea that this kind of imagery of medieval Bigfoot was so common and easy to find too once you know the term. If you just Google wild man, you'll start finding a few. And if you Google like some of the Sasquatch museums and stuff like that, you'll actually find that there's a lot of people that have compiled this stuff already, like out in actual museums. Mm-hmm. It's insane. So, supposedly, wild men, these men and women of ancient times, were usually tall-ish, covered from head to toe in hair, and they spanned all across civilization. The first historian to describe beings like the wild man, Herodotus, was from 484 BC to 425 BC. He places them in western Libya, alongside the headless men with eyes in their chest, and dog-faced creatures. Okay. Ancient Bigfoot depicted before Christ, alongside headless men with eyes in their chest and dog-faced creatures. As somebody who believes in Bigfoot and Dogman, cool. I don't know what the little ogre in the middle is doing, but anyways, going from there, eventually we'll have to talk about ancient Dogman.
Oh,
that could be a future episode.
Get into Egyptians.
So, I'm going to pull from a rather long book, a study of wildmen called Wildman in the Middle Ages, a study of art, sentiment, and demonology by Richard Bernheimer. It was first published in 1952 by Harvard University Press. I searched online for this book for a long, long time and found out copies of it are super rare. and quite a few $100s if you want a somewhat decent copy. Torn up copies are like $200. That's insane. Fortunately, some kind soul has preserved and stored the book on the Internet Archive's open library, so I was able to rent a virtual copy and read it for about an hour before my time ran out. After that, I found out I could just rent it again so long as nobody else is reading it. Mm-hmm. It's just to give other people a chance, but I don't really know why the site works that way. As I go through this, these are literally all of my notes. Besides all the pictures and stuff, I pulled a lot from this book. So at any point that you have something that lines up with me, Taylor, just interrupt me and stop me, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to stop after each paragraph too, but for the sake of the viewers and everyone too, just give me a halt.
Okay.
All right. So this is the natural history of the Wildman, first chapter. And I'm just going to go into all the other chapters after that. So screw it. Richard describes his view of the Wildman by the characteristics every report has in common. It is a hairy man, curiously compounded of human and animal traits, without, however, sinking to the level of an ape. It exhibits upon its naked human anatomy a growth of fur, leaving bare only its face, feet, and human hands, at times its knees and elbows, or the breasts of the female of the species. Frequently, the creature is shown wielding a heavy club or mace or the trunk of a tree, and since its body is usually naked except for I think I made a typo there. Except for a very shaggy covering, it may hide its nudity under a strand of twisted foliage worn around the loins. Boy, that sure sounds like a Sasquatch, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does.
Richard describes the Wildman as a strange relative of Homo sapiens, a lively and sometimes pungent commentary on the bestial side of our nature. It plays an astoundingly persistent, although on the whole subordinate, part in the art and literature of the Middle Ages. Medieval literature and art are shot through with the mythology of the Wildman. We find him in the clipped verses of French Arthurian romance, in the epics by German minstrel singers, and in the writings of Cervantes and Spenser. Did you have some notes on some German something or other?
Well, some of my notes were kind of going along the lines of, I did have an account from a Celtic Arthurian epic.
Okay. That's that French Arthurian romance, eh?
I don't have any romance in mine. But
hey, some of those ladies really like the Sasquatch, man. The whole vast field of late medieval secular art is the Wildman's playgrounds. From prints and paintings to caskets and tapestries, saddles, ornamented weapons, there are stove tiles, candlesticks, drinking cups, and on a larger scale, house signs, chimneys, beams from the frames of houses. His figure has invaded religious buildings and liturgical books, being found on the borders of illuminated manuscripts on capitals, choir stalls, baptismal fronts, tomb plates, even as gargoyles on the eaves of churches. Once on the facade of a Spanish church, it usurped the place which should have been given to the saints, standing full size on the jambs of its main portal. What? That's crazy. But yes, there is a picture we'll look at later of gigantic, I want to keep using the word Bigfoot, but I'm going to restrain myself and say Wildman. Gigantic Wildman carved into the sides of a church.
yeah.
Just like the pillars of saints and angels surrounding the entrance. Why?
Yeah, it just baffles me.
Anyways, going from there, I think it's about time for...
Oh, we're going to do an ad break. All right, we will be right back. And we're back.
Hey! I call that ad break like a tiny bit early, but it just bled in well with where I parted my notes.
Yeah, right on.
Do you have anything to add to where I've left off, Taylor?
I mean, my translated encounter that I have, I don't know at what point I could sneak it in with yours. I mean, you're on a roll right now.
Hey, I'm getting to a poem, so if you want to sneak in something right now, you can go right ahead.
I'll sneak it in. Okay.
Yeah, sneak it in like a true Canadian.
During the 12th century, so I have, again, many of these accounts unfolded. One encounter I want to note here is in 1190. Now, This is a rhyme poem. Hopefully, it's not the actual same poem that you have. But in the introductory section of this poem, I'm hoping I pronounce this right. Evine. Does this sound familiar? Is this what you have?
No.
Okay, good. Again, the Celtic Arthurian epic featuring 8,000 lines. There's a knight named Calogrenant and who recounts an excursion that took place. Calogrenant, I hope I'm saying that right, was riding through the wilderness of the Bretagne. So this is Brittany, France's northwesternmost region. This is an area of dense swampy forests, and Calogrenant eventually...
Get out of my swamp.
Yeah. Oh. So he's just going along, and he eventually comes to a clearing where several bison and here we go again. Aurochs. Do you know what an auroch is?
I do not know what an auroch is. Is that a rock that's very airy?
They became extinct in the 17th century.
What?
Basically, when I looked them up, they looked like they were like bison-like, essentially. Similar. So they were
more airy.
Yeah, they had the horns, everything like that.
Well, that rocks.
Yeah. Oh my god. So I guess a bunch of them were all kind of squaring off, and suddenly the Calogrenant, he noticed a man sitting among them. So what I have here is not a very thoroughly well executed translation, but is to the best that could be based off of the Middle High German text into English. So I'm going to read it. So there I saw a man sitting, right among all of them. That caused my mind to be reassured. But when I came closer and could really observe him, I was very frightened of him. As of the animals, if not more so, his human appearance was above all monstrous. He looked like a Moor, large and so frightful that nobody would believe it. Truly his head was bigger than an aurochs. Like I mentioned earlier, the bison thing.
His head was bigger than a bison.
Yeah. This brute had unkempt and dirty hair. It was dense and completely felted up on the skin of his head. And in his beard, his face was about an ell wide, lined with large wrinkles. There were also his ears, like those of a forest troll, overgrown as if by moss, with hair the length of a span. Wide as a pan, this hulking man had long, scruffy, and gray beard, hair, and eyebrows. His nose was as big as an ox's, short, wide, and nowhere bare. His face lean and flat. Oh, how frightful he looked. His eyes red, angry looking. Now that I found really intriguing.
The red eyes.
Yeah. His mouth stretched in both directions across his cheeks. He had strong teeth, like a boar, not like a man. Again, that makes me think of your canines, essentially. I mean, from like canines, but like coming up from the bottom, like a boar would have, right? Like tusks.
Yeah, like an orc.
Like an orc, exactly. Out of the door of his mouth, they stuck out.
What is it? What do you smell?
Oh, I want to quote it, man flesh. Oh, shout outs to Lord of the Rings. Strong teeth, like a boar, not like a man, out of the door of his mouth. They stuck out, long, sharp, large, and broad. His head was put on him such that his rough chin seemed to be grown to his chest. His back was curved up, hunched, and bent outward. He wore peculiar clothes. 2 pelts he had on. These he had just then pulled off 2 animals. He carried a very large club, which made me unsettled that close to him. Now, that is the whole text, as best as it could be translated. Following that, Calogrenant apparently was to speak with the creature, inquiring if it meant him harm, to which it actually had responded, "If you don't harm me, I will be a friend." Calogrenant eventually departs. Now, in this epic, there are other giants that are mentioned throughout it, but they don't have any discerning features aside from just their size. This was, like, at its core, like, the Wildman.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wish you described the other giants. Were they all big, hairy men, or were they...
It sounded like it was just mostly humans that are taller.
Big
Yeah.
humans. Okay. That's a very interesting epic. And actually, as far as epics go, Probably the most famous and oldest epic known in human history is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is one of the oldest recorded legends, but there's a lot of evidence that Gilgamesh did exist in some form. And in the legends, his best friend was a hairy beast man named Enkidu. Now,
You're looking at me like you're like trying to read me, and I'm like, holy shit.
It's been looked at as if, oh, he had like a lion.
Yeah.
We named the lion Enkidu. But you go back and you read the legends in the text, and no, it's actually described as a very large person covered in hair.
Right.
That was his best friend that ruled alongside of him because Gilgamesh himself was also a giant. So there's a separation there. You've got a giant that's just a normal flesh and bone giant.
Yeah.
And then you've got another giant that rivals his size. That's his best friend. That's a hairy beast man.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Anyways, moving on from there, here's a quick poem from Edmund Spenser relating to the common dwellings of wild men. As I was going through the book, there were a lot of these little poems and stuff interspersed, but this one I really liked. I thought it was quite neat, and it's short and sweet. Fair in the forest, by a hollow glade, covered with mossy shrubs, which spreading broad, did underneath them make a gloomy shade, where foot of living creature never trode. The 14th century author of Gawain and the Green Knight also speaks of dwellings like Stone Craigs, which are the wild men's place, and relates how his company consists of serpents, wolves, and primeval bulls. So persistent are the accounts of the wildman's life that, until recently, natural landmarks preserved such names as the Wildman's Hole or the Wildman's Den. There are such mythologically tagged holes in the Tyrolean and Swiss mountains, from Solden in the Artler region to the Val-d'Altri, holy crap, I barely said that, to the Val-d'Altri near Alagna in the Italian Alps. The habit of naming places in this way is not recent of date, suggested by the occurrence in a Hessian document from the 11th century of the designation Wildero Wibibus, translated
Sorry,
to
can you repeat that?
Wildero Wibibus,
Oh my gosh.
House of the Wild Woman.
Oh
I don't
my
suppose you have any
gosh.
notes on dwellings or anything before I move on, eh?
I'm going to say negative. Not on dwellings, at least.
Well, how about some Bigfoot-like behavior? Richard compiles and describes many stories of wild men, from ones who are shy and spooked at first sight. They take off as soon as you see them. To scary beasts that stand their ground and fight back when threatened, tooth and nail. The oldest known sculpture, known to Richard at the time of his writing, by the way, and this is that one that's on the church, is on the north portal of the mid-13th century church in Semirin Oxus, I'm mispronouncing that, in Provence, which shows the hairy creature putting his hand through the arm... Oh, no, this is a different one, not the church. Which shows the hairy creature putting his hand through the arm of a man, counting money into a sack. And it would seem to be associating the wild man as a demon with a mortal, meant to show the profit of contributing to service and advice.
Okay, I will need a little bit of elaboration and context. So it's a depiction of a man, and this wild man is reaching in and actually taking money?
The hairy creature is putting his hand through the arm of a man, almost as if controlling him.
Oh, okay, I see. Puppeteering.
The statue is meant to convey that the man reaching into the sack of money has help, and that he's sought the advice of something evil,
I see.
and now it's making him rich.
And they're just portraying the wild man as that evil. I see, okay.
Anyways, we've talked a lot about wild men, but how about wild woman? The wild woman holds an even larger place in modern folklore than the male of the species. Should I go on from here? Or do you have
No,
more
keep
quotes on
going
wild
with
men?
this. Keep
Okay.
going with it, yeah.
So, for her presence is recorded in areas which never possessed any wild mythology. Ooh. The wild woman's habitat is considerably larger than that of the wild man, extending beyond the mountainous areas into the plains. We find that her nature has become more diversified than that of her spouse, varying according to local tastes and traditions. Where the environment has attributes of grandeur and strength as in the Alps, the wild woman tends to grow to giant size in depiction the farther out the legends go. So, close to civilization, you have the small wild men and women. As you go outwards, they appear to be described as getting larger and larger until they are giant in size. Now, I'm sure a lot of those are just legends of knights fighting monsters and stuff like that, but interesting to note that they're consistently getting larger the further you go out. By far the most portentous of her subspecies is the so-called Feonge, the Franke, as she is called in the Tyrol and in the Bavarian Alps, a colossal ogre of great strength and appalling ugliness. Bristly all over, she has a mouth forming a grimace that reaches from ear to ear. Her unattended hair is interspersed with lichen. Is it lichen or lichen?
I pronounce it lichen.
Well, it's interspersed with lichen then. And according to a report from Switzerland, she has breasts so long that she can throw them over her shoulders. And she is prone to eat human children.
I mean, the only thing that I can comment on this is that what I'd found about these wild women, they can, I don't know if it's like a disguise or whatnot, but they go into towns and they look human and they lure people. And maybe that kind of relates to how you say closer to towns they're smaller, more into the backwoods, they get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes, I actually read quite a bit about that, where they disguise themselves as human females and seduce men, and then sometimes get so far as marriage, which seems to imply that they speak a language, etc., and go beyond that.
That makes me wonder if it does come to marriage. I don't know the time span of those things, but I would have to think it would have to be within a 24, 48 hour period. Or is it like 60? Like, I don't know. A couple of these days.
You've known your wife for 10 years, and all of a sudden she freaks out and was like, yeah, I'm a big hairy woman.
I mean,
and I'm going to eat you.
Yeah. It would just be totally like...
This is my swamp.
It would be crazy. But again, that is something that is common in our world. I mean, look at Black Widows. They kill their mates afterwards, right? I mean, again... I
was going to say, giant hairy women aren't that common in our world.
No. But in different species on the planet, it is very common where a female will mate and then it'll kill the male after. And again, I defer to Black Widows for just that reason, but it just makes me wonder, is that this case here? And I know we talked about this off cast, they lure kids out, or abduct kids, they eat the kids, and then is that the thing they do? Do they lure men out and then use that as a means of carrying on their lineage and then
reproduction?
They kill them? Yeah.
And there's a report of a female Sasquatch, this guy says, that abducted him, put him in a pit, licked his hands and feet raw so he couldn't climb out, and just mated with him for a really long time. A search party was sent out to find this man. And to his credit, they found him crawling back towards the road with his hand and feet bloody and raw and gross, like he had been trapped for days. And those were the only parts of his body that were really suspiciously worn down. That's kind of scary.
No thanks.
I don't like that.
No thanks in a million years.
Anyways, carry on with any of your notes that are left over here, because I'm going to go on to the Reddit post I had mentioned.
Well, I mean, I don't have anything else, I think, on female wild women.
You almost called them wild men.
I was going to, yeah.
It is 2021.
Yes, this is true. This is true. There are many characters of hairy sorts nowadays. And that's okay.
You can be as hairy as you want.
Exactly.
No one's going to judge.
No, not at all.
Unless you're a Bigfoot, then you don't exist, according to a lot of people.
Yeah, apparently. Well, we're trying to prove otherwise, or we're trying to get to the bottom of it on this cast. But I don't have anything else on the females specifically. My notes would differ, but I think I'll save that for after you get into your next piece of news here.
Okay. So, after all this, I mean, I think Richard's writings, coupled with the insane amounts of imagery we're going to look at after, really show that this creature exists across history and possibly since like the beginning of recorded time. That's a long ways back. Mm-hmm. However, the wild man can be explained away. Best by Reddit user Anuk. Now, I'm just going to quote him. I hope he doesn't mind, or she. But I read the post, and I thought this is a very good explanation and a counter-argument to the whole medieval Sasquatch thing. So, Wildman, or in medieval English, woodwose, were mythological figures related to the Greek satyr or Latin faun. They were mythological personifications of the animus of feral masculinity, of nature and virility, and the antithesis to civilization and culture. There are only sporadic sources about them actually existing. Their presence in medieval texts is almost entirely limited to being foes of heroes of medieval knightly novels, most likely representing the faithful hero defeating the pagan and the animal and man. Then there are folk myths and traditions in which wild people steal children and cattle, destroy Christian symbols, come from the mountains during certain holidays to try to fight the belief of Christ, or reversely to take those unfaithful, and so on. As for that they are only Sasquatches, if we assume that, just like the woodwose, the Sasquatch is merely an archetypal mythological concept and not a real animal, as I said, there are almost no sources about woodwoses actually being a part of the medieval landscape. Those that exist describe them basically as outcasts, as people who live outside of society and turn to animals or people who rejected Christ and become lost to society. I know a story from a chapel near my home village where a wild man was converted by a monk to Christianity and helped him build the chapel, only to then return to live in a village. Other than that, there are stories of kings having wild men in cages in their estates, wild men helping nobles during hunts, or of course chasing people, hurting them, causing them to get lost in the woods. There are many possible ways to explain the wild men. For one, it is rather obvious that they often represent the wild pagans of the old days. Similarly, they often clearly represent social outcasts, criminals, and heretics who fled to the woods. Besides that, it is likely that they were inspired by various mentally ill people who could suffer the same fate in medieval times. Of course, there is a continuous tradition from older pagan times, and the psychological/philosophical concept of the wild man is to be considered, though those old traditions could very well also just be older iterations of the social outcast. And finally, some of the stuff could be inspired by Europeans encountering monkeys, either by trade or very early exploration. Though this is hard to prove since most medieval sources don't claim wild men to be apes or monkeys, nor did the claims say monkeys or apes to be wild men. I encountered some sources speculating hesitantly about the possibility that the woodwose was inspired by surviving remnants of Neanderthal populations in Europe. Those sources tend to be, however, very old, and modern understanding of prehistory is rather clearly set in the fact that Neanderthals are gone and have been gone for a very long time. It's a very romantic idea, Neanderthals surviving in European mountains for millennia while humans develop civilization, sort of like if dwarves or elves survived in a nook of the forest, but there is no hint in the archaeological or historical records for that. Let's not get carried away by the superficial similarities of the Sasquatch and the woodwose. Wild men were only sporadically depicted as inhumanly tall beings, and aside from that, their supposed fur, they were always altogether human. Those cases where they are described as giants are in the knightly novels, where their size is more symbolic of their strength and dangerousness than anything else. Unlike the Mongolian traditions about the Almas, the Caucasian traditions about the Kupre, the Chinese Yeren and Tibetan Yeti, or the North American Sasquatch, they never describe them as something halfway between man and animal. It's just a man, albeit wild. They aren't forces of nature. They're humans. For the sake of seriousness relating to the Sasquatch topic, let's not drag this cultural pareidolia into it. That was a very well-written argument.
That was extremely well-written.
And I think the best rebuttal to that argument is it's time for an ad break.
Yes, it is. We'll be right back. And we're back.
And there is no rebuttal to that argument. I actually really like that. I think that's a good alternate view from the other side of it.
Absolutely. I'm very happy you found that. That is just kudos to that person that wrote that. I love that. I don't even know where to go from that, actually, but by God, I'm going to try my best.
Yeah, take it from here, Taylor. I'll close us off after you're done, and we'll look at some pictures.
Yeah, so in that, it was mentioned about Europeans formerly considered what they saw to be exaggerated reports of apes, whatnot. I'm using that as a tie-in because you had mentioned these earlier with the depictions of wild men, woodwows, dog man, and these creatures that have their faces on their chests. Mm-hmm. And I found that interesting because these things, as depicted, and I know that there's a piece of art that has a depiction of all three, this depiction made me kind of think, okay, maybe there is something to this thing about being Bigfoot related. And I say that because of how Bigfoot is a hunched creature, and it looks like the face is lower than its head is on a human. It's down, kind of the shoulders are up and the head's down to where the chest is.
They don't really have a neck.
No, their neck is totally covered up. Yeah, exactly. These things are, I'm going to hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, blemyas. Now...
Blemyas?
Blemyas.
Can you blame them for that?
I can't. Blemyas. Not at all. Not at all. So there are various species of mythical headless men that inhabited remote parts of the world. The blemyas are mentioned to occur in two distinguishing types, either with eyes on the chest or the eyes on the shoulders. These creatures have again been illustrated onto medieval maps. And I just wanted to mention that just as noting because could people mistaken them as Bigfoot? I don't know, but just thought that was interesting. Another piece of information I found was a 15th century Strasbourg theologian, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, called...
How many times has Taylor said, I hope I'm pronouncing this right?
It's like a drinking game. Take a shot, yeah.
Every time we mispronounce something during podcasts.
Just take a shot, yeah.
You won't live through an episode.
No. Am I taking the shots? Oh, then I'm not making it out alive. Geiler von Keisberg.
Oh, jeez. I'd be so wasted.
In one of the collected sermons, published under the title Die Emis, I guess, which means the ant, categorized 5 types of wild men. The solitari, the Sacani. The Sacani were detailed to live in the desert wilderness. The Hispani, the Piganini.
The Piganini.
Piganini, and the Diaboli. Much of this imagery appeared in the late medieval times, again, which served as a contrasting function as both the wild man being both myth and a symbol. From looking a little bit more into that, it looked like the Diaboli was more so demon. Mm-hmm. And that, from what I found,
diabolical.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That was more connected with like a Sasquatch in general, the two. So I just found that very interesting. There is one more thing that I had found. They are called the Anthropophage. The Anthropophage is a mythical race of cannibals. The word first appearing in English in 1552. Many tribes that neighbored them had removed themselves and distanced themselves further away because this group would come out and they would take people and they would eat them. I couldn't find really much on what they looked like or anything like that, but again, I just found that interesting because when you start looking into one thing, and you have to start your search somewhere, medieval wild man, right?
Yeah.
And then you start looking, okay, all the different terms, the blemyas, and all these different things. And then I find this term, okay, the anthropophage, and you have to look into these words that were used back in the day that aren't used now, like Bigfoot and Yowie and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So these words like depicting, okay, these were cannibals back then. And it's just such a spider web of things kind of branching out, but...
That is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. That is all I got on my notes.
Hey, that's okay. So, I suppose then, to kind of end off our normal part of the podcast, I suppose the question boils down to this. Is the wild man a common theme for representation of uncivilized humanity? A depiction of mankind that gained traction as a fairy tale and mythological being in many areas and spread throughout history? Or were some of these depictions of wild men truly another race of people that were around at some point? Perhaps even still around today. And now what we know as Sasquatch.
Ooh.
We're your hosts. No, we're not done yet.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah, that was a really good ending.
That was very good.
If only that was actually the ending. No, I think Taylor and I are gonna do something kind of random, and normally we have some fun topics where we discuss the theme of whatever we were talking about and what we would do in certain scenarios. Let's just look and describe like all these really creepy old pictures of medieval wildmen and Bigfoot and stuff, and let's take a look at them.
Yes, please.
Yeah, if you want to, I'll see if I can rotate these pictures here. Make it so that we can both kind of see. Let's try to describe some of these together here. So Taylor, do you want to take us off on the first one?
So this one, this is interesting. Okay, this has to be a classic Woodwose. It's got the club, everything.
A classic Woodwose.
A classic Woodwose,
Taylor,
yeah.
Ever the deducing detective. Yes, this is a classic Woodwose in its natural habitat, holding a shield with a fancy-looking dog and a club made of club material.
Some ivory.
Yep, that's wood.
It's interesting with this, and I actually forgot to mention that the Woodwose was reported to have vines that were kind of connected through its hair, its head, and was actually supposed to go further into its, like, actually be part of its body. Mm. And this is represented in this image. You can see the vines clearly as part of it.
Kind of looks like a holy crown surrounding this.
Yeah.
Like this is a very hairy Jesus holding a shield and a club.
That is a very interesting looking shield. Well,
yeah.
The background too. I'm trying to gauge what the background is. It's just land, I guess.
Yeah, just some land, but it looks like this was like an emblem or something used in medieval times.
Yeah, which I know the Woodwose was used as a crest.
Moving on, we have a very scary picture. Holy. We have two naked ladies covered in hair. They are standing just outside the entrance of a cave, and there's a little fountain that's pouring some water into a puddle. It's a very depressing looking puddle, and a castle way in the background. The first and most prominent subject of this picture, the naked Sasquatch lady, actually that could be a man, just with very tiny boobs. He's got like a big walking stick, and he's just looking solemnly out of the painting.
Can I see the stick?
Yeah.
Is it kind of like a club? Oh, that's well.
It's like a walking stick. It's like Gandalf.
Look at the bottom, though. I mean, that's definitely club-like.
Oh,
right?
It is. Maybe they're going for a golfing trip.
It looks like a golf club, yeah.
And then we have the wild woman nursing a baby.
Yeah.
And the creepy part about this, look at the baby.
It's a straight-up human.
That's a human baby that it's nursing. That is not another Wildman baby.
A juvenile one that just hasn't grown out hair, do you think? Or do you think that's a straight-up depiction of it's an abducted baby?
That's up to the person looking at the picture to decide.
Yeah,
we don't have the original artist here to represent it.
We don't. Is that a castle behind them?
Yeah, that is.
Then I would give them more credibility to the fact that they're living in a dwelling, and I'm not going to say because my opinion is invalid on so many of these things, but it adds to the fact that, okay, they live outside the castle, they abducted someone, and they're living out here. I mean, why put the castle in the domain of man and behind them? It just seems peculiar. But they made it look very, very dark. Yeah.
Now, this one's going to be a little bit harder to look at for the both of us. I wish there was an easier way to show these images across without moving away from the microphone. But this one we have a large hairy wild man with vines entwined around his waist, holding a shield in one hand and cradling a statuette of a naked woman, encircled by a flaming mandrola in his other arm. He leads a forlorn-looking youth whose hands are bound behind his back. From a dense woods. Ooh. How would you describe that if you were to look at that picture?
So it looks like he's got a shield, but there's clearly a horse in the background. There's two, I'm assuming, knights kind of pushing forward, tracking him, and then he is holding what looks like a woman in his other hand.
Yeah, like well, there's like a emblem or something, like a
Yeah.
statue of a woman.
But that is a shield in his other hand, is it not?
Kind of looks like it. This is a very weird picture. It just looks like a mess.
It is.
Like the person that was drawing this had too many fungus from the forest when they did this.
Well, there's so much going on. It's very busy.
Moving on, here's a very interesting one. This is a very classic medieval painting style one where everyone's drawn in that kind of flat, weird looking 2D side view.
Yeah. Like a panoramic.
This one looks like a full on war.
This is giving me the chills. Now, again, everyone tuning in, many of these photos, we will put them on the blog that you can see on the website when this episode is released on the main feed. But yeah, that is a full-on war. Interesting thing to note, both sides are using what look like a shield that have faces on them. The knights and the Wildmen. I wonder what that is in relation to.
The Wildmen, actually, they both do have weird big face shields, or maybe they're holding like a severed head or something. And then they got like the Pumbas running around, the big big hogs.
Yeah. Blah, blah, blah.
They're all wielding
boars.
spears and just going at it. It's like a total war scene.
What is that? Is there any more information on that specific image? Was it in relevance to something important?
Alexander in combat with wild men and beasts. So this would be Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great. Really?
Moving on to our next picture, we have a very lovely looking wild man covered in gray hair, standing and posing for the painter.
This one looks like he doesn't necessarily even come off as a wild man. I mean, he definitely seems, he's hairy, but he seems like he's something of royalty almost, or at least depicted as such.
But the only places that don't have hair are his knees, his feet, hands, and upper part of his face.
Note that was the same as the image of the male, female, and the baby. They didn't have hair on their knees either. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Could it
and
be
there were
like
stories of these being tamed and stuff like that. Actually, I read in that one book by Richard that there is one account where they abduct a wild man and shave him and cut a vein under his tongue to let him form proper words and sentences and speak English.
So why have shaved knees? My only thought of
Maybe
that
it just
would
doesn't
be,
grow naturally if they're down on the knees all the time.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, exactly. I mean, not to like judge, but like my legs are pretty hairy. But
Not
if
as
you,
hairy as his.
If you move up, no. If you move up to my knees, it's a little thinned out there.
Yeah. Now, this painting of a wild man, he's holding a club. He's got a kind of a weird scroll-like shield with a dragon on it. And he's wearing the skin of a leopard as a shawl.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's got a little grassy hat.
Yeah. It's interesting. That coincides with my Calogrenant story of the knights seeing him with wearing not necessarily apparel, but draped in animal fur, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that's a leopard. It goes to show what part of the world is that, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, just something to think about.
That is very interesting to think about, too. Here we have a very ancient medieval tapestry, and on it depicts wild men and women working a field with scythes or sickles. And then there's another wild man riding a horse that's got reins in a saddle. And beyond that, not much else to really say about it, but it's interesting that they're working a field as if they're civilized or tamed.
So those are crops below them? It almost looked like there was like either a rock or a bird that was dead on the ground almost.
No, they're not dead. They just look like they're eating.
Oh, yeah, I see. Very interesting depiction.
And there's a caption to this one. It says, wild women were pictured as good mothers of their children and able riders of horses or stags. Frequently, the wild man was a combatant, whether against human military opponents or his own giant rivals.
Interesting.
Now, here's a fun one.
Oh, this one's freaking me out. This is like a Yeti.
Yeah, it's a white-haired wild man, down on all fours, looking forward like a dog, crawling and weaving in and out of the trees.
There's so much, I mean, perspective, but so much you could take from this. Like you said, weaving in between the trees. I feel like it expresses a very symbolic aesthetic to it.
And Bigfoot are known for peeking from trees.
Yep.
Now, here's another thing Bigfoot are sometimes known for.
It's trying to abduct her, right?
Yeah, you describe the picture for our listeners.
Well, this woman looks like it looks like she's trying to hold onto the tree, and this Bigfoot or this wild man is trying to pull her away. Well, looking at the landscape though, even like, yeah, at first, like looking at it, I honestly thought that he was like picking a tree and turning it upside down, but yeah, he's trying to pull this woman away.
Yeah, that's super scary. Going from there, we have some Yeti-looking wild man supporting a shield and holding up a knight's helmet with some royal decorations on it. Interesting piece of art.
Very weird why they have that.
And then we also just have a page from a medieval book that depicts a wild man with a club and a wild woman holding a baby that's on it's standing, like holding up its arm, little baby arm, and the mom's holding it. And it's a hairy baby too.
Yes, it
with
is.
lighter hair.
And the club again, just as a recurring theme.
Yeah. Oh, this one's hard to look at. So those medieval tapestries and stuff, they are so decorative. It's almost like you're trying to look at one of those old 3D puzzles where you have to cross your eyes to see a picture.
Yeah.
But this one seems to depict Wildman apparently assailing a castle. I can't make any of that out. It is a very hard piece of work with a lot of hairy looking people.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of fancy, trippy background patterns.
Wildmen assail a Moorish castle in northwestern Africa.
Yes.
Germany, 1440.
Now, this is taken from a PDF document that compiles a whole bunch of these pictures. However, it was kind of dissed for getting some information wrong.
Oh.
So we can't necessarily look at all these quotes and go, oh, that's exactly what this is of.
I see.
So I'm taking it with a grain of salt as we go through some of these.
Disregard my quote.
However, cannibals. Here's one of a very gigantic wild woman. It looks like a woman, I'm not sure. Bending down in a very awkward angle, just eating a person.
They're huge compared to the person. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the person's like the size of maybe its forearm with a little bit of extra. And the wild woman, man, person thing is leaning down at the waist, but not bending the legs very much and eating this person. Looks like a scene out of Attack on Titan.
That's just what I was thinking, 100%. That's terrifying. Wow.
Here we have a cannibal or werewolf with a trail of corpses. A person that looks like a wild man down on all fours eating a child as it scurries away from a home.
I saw this one. Yeah. That one is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. This is a very well-drawn piece of work. It almost looks like something out of a comic book. Apparently it's from 1510, if the caption is to be believed. Here we just have a wild man with a Jesus beard holding a club.
The club again, yeah.
Lots of fur or hair all over his body. Mm-hmm. I can't tell where this is cropped from. This could be from a tapestry or just a carving of some kind that's on like a wall. Here we have a very Japanese-looking piece of art of a wild woman tending to a shrub. She is sitting down with her legs crossed, and it's almost a very serene picture with very curvy, curly hair all over. Mm-hmm. Now we have a picture of what looks like a knight and a wild man having a little clash. And it looks like it's on like a piece of wood or something that this was painted.
Yeah, it does.
He's holding a spear or something like that. The wild's holding a spear. The knight's holding what looks like a giant 4-leaf clover. I can't describe that.
That's a wild man? Looks like he's wearing pajamas.
Can we get pajamas that look like just interspersed hair?
I see.
It looks like someone took a drawing of armpit hair and then photoshopped it everywhere across the body.
I thought they were little sailboats, to be honest.
Our poor listeners don't even know what this image looks like. That was a very bad explanation.
Check the blog, you'll see.
Ooh, here's a good picture. It's a whole bunch of knights holding daggers and raising their arms in like a protest as two wild men try to abduct a naked lady. And there's another knight that's, oh, okay, they're not really abducting. They're desperately trying to grab a naked lady. And some other knights are actually pushing a wild man into a fire. Now, I think this is from the Alexander the Great Chronicles of Wildman, where they actually wipe out a civilization of hairy people by throwing them into fires.
Really? Oh my gosh. That's a very interesting depiction as well. You know what? Maybe we'll throw to another ad break here.
Yeah, I think that'll be our last ad break, and we'll look at the last few pictures, and then we'll be done.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. We'll be right back. And we're back. So what do you got next for us?
The Combat of Valentin and Namalos. A black ink drawing by Hans Bergmar, 1503 Germany. Very interesting piece of work, and it's very well detailed. Definitely check the blog for this one. If there's one particular image of Wildman you need to see, this one is it. I love this picture.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a gigantic club being held in defense by a really large wild man with a fancy beard and top knot on his head.
Notice
and a knight just leaning forward, raising his sword to fight, and it's clashing with that club. Notice in the middle of the woods.
The dead bodies behind him. That's very interesting.
Yes, there's lots of bodies on the ground. I can't even tell what they're wearing. Like some of those bodies almost look naked.
There's clearly a knight, but there's one in the back that looks like it's like another Woodwose, to be honest.
I've got a slightly clearer picture of that.
Okay. Yeah, that gives me the chills looking at that. Wow.
This is like the podcast no, looking at pictures. Here's a carving of a wild man or a woodwose. Just at the top of an arch, leaning down, like a draw me like one of your French girls type things.
Yeah, right in an archway. Yeah. Again, like, tune into the blog for this, but one of the reasons we're talking about these images is just because I think personally it's very relevant to the fact that this is all historical imagery and depictions of these things. Here you go. This is obviously defending a child, an infant, woodwose, or...
Yeah, this is a picture of a wild man, again, holding up a club or something, defending itself against a knight.
Yeah.
And there's a little child... wild man between the big one's legs, crouched down in fear, looking up at the night.
Yeah. The humans in these are depicted as being very dark. Again, I say that with a grain of salt. You see these things trying to take women and kids and everything in this imagery, but you see the humans also committing serious atrocities as well. Again, like you said, that Alexander piece where they're burning them in the fires. I don't know the context. These things could be very evil, but it's just very intriguing. Interesting. So this looks like there's several females and a male, and the humans are just charging at them while they're in the water. Yeah. They're on horseback.
They're all trying to have a bath and spinning around. The one wild man's pointing like, "Whoa, look at these guys coming over the hill.
Yeah.
The kids are on our lawn again." Here we have a little sculpture, little toy or something like that of a wild man.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Oh my gosh.
It's like a little gold... I don't even know what to say. It looks like it would be small, like a little statue or something that you'd put on a desk.
Yeah.
And it's just a little golden wild man with a club over his shoulder. And the carving's not particularly great. You can tell that's exactly what it is, but it's one of those ones that's just worn down with age. It's faded. It doesn't look so great anymore. Oh, wow. Here's a very weird one. I don't even know what to make of this. This looks like something out of a Ghibli movie. Like a My Neighbor Totoro type thing with a wild man with a big knapsack of hair and a person jumping out of the sack like a kangaroo cub.
It's funny because he kind of looks like the depiction of that creature from Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah. And then there's like naked Tarzan man jumping out of the sack. And then the wild woman person thing running away into the woods. I can't believe how much art there is. This is just... There's so much stuff. You have one here of the wild man wearing a crown around his head. Just sitting on what looks like a stump or some rocks and just minding his own business. But he's not wearing anything else. He's just hairy.
Yeah.
And then finally, here is our church sculptures.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Just like you would see the saints or somebody. These are wildmen, head to toe, covered in hair. One is resting a club on the ground. The other is resting his hand on a shield and then has his other arm wrapped around a club or a stick. And they are carved perfectly into the side of a church. Huge statues.
It's fun. They are huge. It's funny how all of these representations of the wild man, their faces look identical in all these different portrayals.
They do, and that's the interesting thing about the Wildman's faces is these ones are all portrayed with very saint-like, human-like faces. Like it was, if there was one way to draw a face in the Middle Ages, this was the way you draw a man with a beard. And then you have those really random ones where all of a sudden it doesn't look so human anymore. It's got the really wide lips.
Yeah.
Oh. Anyways, there are more pictures, and I don't think we could possibly cover them all. But I think that about wraps it up. If you want to see all of these pictures and more, check out the blog. Mm-hmm. We'll have them all posted up there. We'll compile all of it together for if you want to see what we're talking about, go give it a look. Thank you for listening to the kind of afterward bit. We've already ended the episode, and now it's time to end it again.
Well, I have one question that I want to pitch to you. So,
yeah,
from the wild man to Bigfoot, do you feel like, just flat out say, is it one and the same?
I think both possibilities exist in a sense that I'm someone that believes in Bigfoot, so obviously there had to have been sightings of Bigfoot in the past, maybe more frequently. I think the Wildman ties into that, and I think while it could have been a myth or even just a folk tale or something, the animalistic nature of man, and it was romanticized, and Wildmen became their own thing. It could have started very well from Bigfoot sightings. Like, there could be a lot of these stories that are true, and then they were spun into the Wildmen as a fairy tale. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think it starts from somewhere. I mean, mankind goes back a long time. And these things that are seen and depicted nowadays, they seem from our research to be depicted back then as well. I think you have a smaller representation of these creatures, the wild men, back in the day using tools. And now these days you have accounts of them being larger, bigger. We don't see them really using tools, but for whatever reason, they have reason to avoid man.
Yeah.
I mean, we just looked at a bunch of photos depicting wars.
They're going to cut our tongue veins and make us speak.
Well, yeah, like they're being cast into society by us, and for what? Now, they're depicted by religion. They're depicted in all these different mediums. I just think it's fascinating how it's all hush-hush now. Mm-hmm. I can tell you straight off the hop, if I were to go and talk to someone and be like, hey, did you know Bigfoot existed back in the medieval ages? They look at me like I'm a psycho. They think, again, like you said at the beginning of the episode, it comes full circle. People hear Bigfoot, they think of the Patterson footage. That's what they go to. They think that's where it started. But I'm not going to say the solid evidence, but the history is rich and it is there going back centuries. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'll end it for me.
I think that's where we should end it.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning into this episode of Cryptid Clues. Again, be sure to check us out on our social media, our website. And then also, if you have any questions or you have any encounters or stories you want to send to us, CryptidClues@gmail.com. So until next time, we will see you guys soon.
Bye-bye.